Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Kubernetes community meeting. Hope you're all having a fantastic week. My name is Jonas Rosland, and I'll be your host here today. Before we start, we do have a code of conduct. This is being recorded and live streamed, so make sure you don't say or do anything that you don't want permanently recorded. Today we have three SIGs presenting, or two SIGs presenting. We have Cloud Provider, API Machinery, and then we have Steering. But first off, we have a demo by Klaus Ma, who will give us a tour and a demo of Volcano. Klaus, are you ready to go?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to give an introduction and a quick demo about Volcano. Volcano is a Kubernetes native batch system. Because when we run some AI Spark on the Kubernetes, we found there's some common gaps for this kind of workload. Kubernetes supports service workload well recently, and more people want to run some other framework or other workload onto the Kubernetes, such as TensorFlow, MPI, something like that. And we found some major gaps here is that we would like to have some, some queue management in the batch system to share results between the different tenants. And we also want to would like job to support multiple pod template because of the task of job maybe use a different command or maybe different memory, a different image. And we also have some error handling, such as a restart job if one pod was failed, and some indexing and delay pod creation. Another important thing is about scheduler. MPI workload needs the cost scheduling or gun scheduling, and we also get several people requirement about fair share scheduling between the different tenants. And they also would like based on the queue to do that, and also some preemption. This preemption depends on the fair share between the different tenants, not only the priority. Yeah, maybe some also feature here. Yeah, and so we based on this gap, we would like to start a project we call it to close those gaps. Yeah, this is our scope and our target of this project, and I will give a quick demo. So, if there are any questions, you can ask. Here is we have a cluster here, and this is the version of this cluster. So I will give two demos here. Now the first one is I would like to show the fair share between the different jobs. Another one is gun scheduling for the MPI. So we can see our the YAML file for the MPI job. Now the first one is the DRF. We are using DRF to share results between the different jobs. We start. In this demo, we only use the index. We are going to first start one index job to start 10 posts. Yeah, and get the posts. We can see that there are 10 posts are starting and one is pending because we only have nine CPU here, and we are going to the other index is similar one. So we are going to start another index 1, and we are also going to start index 2. Yes, index 2 with 9. So please see index 1. For the index 1 and index 2, we are going to use Volcano as a scheduler part. Wait, 1, 3. 2, 3. Okay. Okay, we start several replica sites here, and only the first one, Nginx starting pod. The pod can start running, and the other pod are pending here. So for now, we are going to delete as Nginx1. Delete Nginx. So we would like the scheduler will share the results between the Nginx1 and Nginx2. So they're going to maybe Nginx1 maybe have 5 and Nginx2 maybe have 4 to 4 pods are going to start. So with we're seeing some pods start to running. Yes, it goes. So we can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The Nginx1 start 5 pods, and Nginx2 are going to start 4 pods here. So they are going to share the results of almost half of the cluster. Yeah. So and we are going to make sure that this one, because the default scheduler are they don't have such kind of ability to share to have such kind of fair share result fair share capability between the different replica sites. Another one is MPI. So another important thing is we start sorry. Another thing is that we introduce a new job here to support multiple pod template. In this table, we are going to have a minimal available. This is for GAN scheduling, and we also we set the scheduler name to Volcano. Another one important thing is we call it plugin. This means for MPI, we need to have to house the information between the different different pod, master and the and the worker. And for MPI, we also need to have SSH to communicate between each other. So we also introduce such kind of plugin. So for some other other framework or other application, if you didn't use SSH plugin, so you can just ignore this one. For example, you can comment out this plugin. Another one is we support lifecycle policy. For this policy is that if pod is killed or evicted, we are going to restart the whole job because the MPI requires this one. Another one is we support multiple pod template. So the first one is MPI master. Another one is MPI worker. The command line may be different. And in this type, in each task, we also support the task policy. Here is that for task complete, if the MPI execute is complete, we are consider the whole job is complete. Yeah. So if there, for example, for the test flow for PS worker, you can consider if the worker is complete, the whole job is finished. So you can put this policy into different tasks to make sure if part of task is complete, we are consider the whole job is complete, is finished. So we have lots of information in the in this directory in etc volcano, and this is the host list of the other pods. So we are start MPI run MPI execute to have a hello world example here. Another one is the worker are going to start SSH, and we also already have SSH plugin, so we will provide information such as a public and a private key to the SSH, so they don't need to provide any password or something like that. Another one is we are in Volcano we also support GAN scheduling, so we can create Nginx. Sorry. create images.
Klaus, just a 2-minute warning. I want to make sure
Okay.
that we get everything in.
Okay, 2 minutes. Oh, that's enough. This is the last demo. Okay. Okay, in this demo, I start the seven engines here. So we have just 2 CPU idle here, and I'm going to create MPI job here, and we can see that this is the gun scheduling that we have two CPU idle here, but non-task, no pod was started because of it to make sure that it asking everyone to be start together. Okay, and then we delete the nginx, we are going to start the MPI job. So we can see that every the start is the worker complete, yeah, and the MPI gets completed, and the other one is terminating. Because according to the policy, when the MPI execute is finished, the whole job are going to finish. Hi. This is the output. We can see that this is the MPI run. MPI master are going to use SH to communicate with the others, 1, 2, 0, 1, 0, 1, and 2. And this is the output from the workers. This is the MPI hello world in the as the MPI example. I think this is the major demo of this feature, and we also did some tests about the gun scheduling. We found that if we submit lots of jobs, they're going to be easy to get deadlock here, and gun scheduling also have to to save resource utilization. We also support task topologic and impact to improve the performance of TensorFlow. Yeah. We also have some other feature in the roadmap. We would like to to support GPU, some others. Okay, that's all from me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Klaus.
Okay.
There is one question in the chat. Maybe you can answer that in the chat as well. I'm gonna post a link to the repository and the website there. Thank you so much, Klaus.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have release updates. Lucky.
Thanks, Jonas, and hello, everybody. My name's Lockie. I'm the 1.16 release team, and yes, that's 1.16. I know 1.15 just hit, but we're already busily preparing for 1.16. So just a couple of updates that are all mentioned in the agenda. So if you go take a look at the agenda, if you miss anything that I'm saying, we are in week 2 of a 12-week release cycle, and we have the target release date set for September the 16th for 1.16. Currently, we're at the stage where we've just completed selecting the release team. So I've linked all the release team members that you can take a look at your own leisure. And next Tuesday, July 16th, will be when we cut the first 1.16 alpha release. So keep an eye out for that. Other important milestones to call out for 1.16 specifically is July 30th is enhancements freeze. So if you're working on any enhancements, please make sure to have them in the right state, in the right place by the end of July. So 7:30 EOD Pacific is when we'll be freezing enhancements for 1.16. A couple of patch release updates. We've had a big week. 7.18 next week, which is next Thursday, I believe, 1.15.1 is scheduled to be cut. This week on the 8th, which was Monday, we saw 1.12.10, 1.13.8 and 1.14.4 released. So go and grab them if you're looking for them. And 1.12.10 was actually the last patch release of the 12 minor release. So just keep that in mind. That's all I have, and I'll hand it back to you, Jonas, if there aren't any questions. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll dive right into contributor tip of the week. And Aaron.
Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron of Sigbeard. I'm here with your contributor tip of the week. So I will go ahead and share my screen. So you can follow along if you'd like inside of the docs. All these links are linked in the meeting notes. So I wanted to brag about the fact that we have rewrote the README in test infra. Now I know we have a lot of random code in here and like, oh my God, what even is all of this? So test infra is kind of like the main repo for everything that SIG testing does. We do have a number of sub-projects that live elsewhere, but we've gone through and sort of rewritten the README to be a little bit more user-oriented or self-service. So if you want to understand how to add or manage jobs, there are a couple links here, which we'll follow in just a second. If you want to understand more about the various dashboards that display things like test results, you can take a look at them here. I always like to show off the triage dashboard every chance I get, right? This is the thing that sort of takes a look at, oh, maybe it's not working, here we go. It just sort of shows like all the test failures across all the jobs for the last 2 weeks, and then you can start to sort of cluster them together. My favorite is, of course, timed out waiting for condition, but we can just sort of, look for all of the GKE jobs that are failing. It's my favorite thing to do, and you can see that they're kind of failing consistently. You can also use these things to sort of focus on like what are the clusters that are related to the big data SIG or the auto scaling thing. Apparently auto scaling people maybe have something to worry about starting July 3rd. So this is a great way to troubleshoot failures. And we have a bunch of other dashboards. Some of you are probably familiar with things like the PR status dashboard that sort of shows off like what PRs do I have outstanding by author spiffxp, and then like what are the reasons this PR hasn't merged yet. I can also, if I'm feeling particularly stocky, I can take a look at sort of the history for Tide. Oh, the Zoom thing is getting in the way. Here we go. Where I can sort of see like what is it that Tide is doing, and I can sort of focus just on the Kubernetes repo, because that tends to be the one that I watch a lot down here. And then this just sort of lets me know like what PRs are getting triggered in which batches when, which can be sort of helpful if you want to understand, like generally speaking, the queue seems pretty healthy, I guess. We don't have a ton of crazy failures. Anyway, so hopefully this better documents like what it is that is available in this repo if you want to come help out and understand all of the things that we do. And then I wanted to show you this like one weird trick to help you get your jobs to merge faster. So if I click on add or update job configs, it's going to take me to this file, adding or updating jobs, which will sort of describe the step-by-step process I have to follow. And there's this thing about test grid annotations, right? So I don't know how many of you are familiar with testgrid config.yaml, but like when you want to add a job, you kind of have to take a look at where in this 1,000, I think it's maybe 5,000 line file are you supposed to add changes. So that's sort of the old way of adding test grid changes, right? The new way is to use these annotations that you can put directly on your proud job. So things like what dashboard do I want this to show up in? What tab name do I want it to be? What sort of alerting stuff do I care about? And some of you on the release team may be familiar with this because we started introducing this as we sort of automated how the dashboards get generated. You can see examples of this to copy paste in the job examples section. So for example, the pull community verify job, right? It's going to show up on the SIG Contribx community pull verify dashboard. And so that's just sort of in line right with the job config. And the reason this will help you merge your changes faster is because the set of people who can approve changes to that big, massive test grid config is a little bit smaller, whereas all of the jobs are sort of owned by the SIGs that own those jobs. And so just to prove that this works, I will look for pull verify, and it shows up in SIG Contribx community. and I will hit enter, and ta-da, that's there because of this job. So if you want your job changes to merge faster and you want them to show up on test grid, use these annotations. I'm out.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. We're gonna dive right into the SIG updates, and the first one we have is SIG Cloud Provider. Andrew Kim, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. Let me share my screen. Folks, see that?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So yeah, hi, I'm Andrew Kim. I'm one of the co-chairs of SIG Cloud Provider. So let's just dive straight into the 115 accomplishments that we did. One of the biggest milestones that we accomplished in V115 is migrating the legacy in-tree cloud providers to staging. And so this is kind of to help the in-tree cloud providers ease into the transition of adopting the out-of-tree cloud provider architecture that we want the Kubernetes project to be using long-term. And so staging helps us to kind of publish existing cloud provider implementations in tree into an external repository so that we can have those out-of-tree repositories vendor in the existing implementations. And that helps us to remove any duplication of code. We have full compatibility of the implementations in tree and out of tree, and that kind of just helps us to develop the cloud providers in a single place, but being able to publish it and have the out of tree providers import them. And so we have most of the cloud providers in staging, and so right now we're trying to gain adoption of more adoption of the out of tree model in production, which I'm going to talk about more on the next slide. Walter Fender from Google merged the API server network proxy KEP with collaboration from SIG API machinery and SIG network. So this replaces the SSH functionality that the CPI had, which helps to segment the network between the control plane and the cluster network. And so this is one of the blockers that were for removing the in-tree cloud provider, because the API server has a direct dependency in the cloud provider to fetch the SSH keys that are required for this. And so this was the KEP is merged, and we'll be doing an alpha implementation in 4.1.16. The other thing that was accomplished, well, this is actually 1.16, but I just figured I'd put it in now. We removed three of the 8 in-tree cloud providers. So CloudStack, Overt, and the Photon cloud provider has been removed in tree. And so, as many of you know, this effort has been, and it's been a long-running effort to try to, get these in-tree cloud providers removed. And so we're finally making some good progress. Shout out to DIMS for driving this and ensuring that we had consensus and the okay to remove these 3 cloud providers. Next was alpha support for load balancer finalizers. And so when the CPI or when you create a service of type load balancer in Kubernetes, CPI then provisions a load balancer on the cloud provider. And so we were getting a lot of user feedback that in various edge cases, the load balancer wouldn't get cleaned up properly. And so we were seeing users who were getting charged for load balancers that were just left by Kubernetes. And so adding finalizer support ensures that the service object isn't deleted until Kubernetes verifies that the load balancer is also deleted. And so with SIG Network, we added alpha support for this in 1.15, and we'll be pushing to enable it by default in 1.16. And lastly, documentation. Common feedback that we get from the community is lack of documentation in the CPI. As many of you, I'm sure, know, the CPI can be pretty difficult to operate. Each provider has different annotations and labels specific to the various services that are offered on the cloud provider. Something like setting up IAM permissions for your control plane is not well documented. So we have users who do it by trial and error, or they go and start reading the source code to figure out what IAM permissions they need for their Kubernetes clusters. And so generally this isn't a problem for managed offerings, but we're finding that for a lot of users who spin up their own clusters, this is a problem. And so we've made some good progress on documentation in 1.15. We've had a few cloud providers even spin up their own kind of websites to host all of the information for how to operate their cloud providers, and we'll be pushing this forward more. So yeah, let's go into what we have planned for 1.16. So we have a big change to SIG governance happening in 1.16. As many of you know, right now we have both SIG cloud provider, but we have all the SIGs that represent the industry cloud providers as well. So we have SIG AWS, SIG Azure, SIG GCP, SIG IBM, SIG OpenStack, and SIG VMware. And so we have been, Nishi has been driving this effort with communication with the steering committee to transition all of the provider-specific SIGs into sub-projects under SIG Cloud Provider. And so the key benefit to doing this for the ecosystem is that now we have a scalable way to endorse and welcome new cloud providers into our ecosystem as sub-projects under a single SIG, instead of having a SIG per cloud provider, which we found out was not a scalable model. Next is that we're going to continue, Walter's going to be continuing the work on the API server network proxy to remove the XSH proxy functionality I was talking about in CPI. So this will be alpha for 1.16. We're going to have beta support for load balancer finalizers, which will be on by default. We're going to be continuing work to remove the entry cloud providers. And so a lot of this is going to be driving adoption for the Cloud Controller Manager and production clusters. And providing better ways to migrate HA clusters, which we're finding from a lot of users that the migration becomes really tricky with HA clusters because you can have a split brain between the Kube Controller Manager and the Cloud Controller Manager. And lastly, we're going to keep continuing on docs. Docs is P0 for 1.16. So we're going to make sure that all the providers are writing docs for all the users that aren't on managed offerings, because there's quite a few users that are rolling Kubernetes on their own. And so one thing that I feel like we don't do enough is actually give a big shout out to all the external cloud providers. I think it was 1.7 where we officially said we're not adding new entry cloud providers to the Kubernetes project. And so, a lot of providers that wanted to have that native Kubernetes support had to, adopt this new design, this new architecture that we're proposing. And so, Alibaba Cloud, Baidu Cloud, Brightbox Cloud, CloudStack, DigitalOcean, Herster Cloud, Packet, Tencent Cloud. I'm sure there's some I missed, and I'm sorry if I did. But these are all cloud providers who, devoted engineers to work on the Cloud Controller Manager, to adopt the new architecture and help us develop it. And so I wanted to take some time to give a shout out and appreciate the work that they're doing here. Lastly, how you can contribute. We have a SIG backlog, kits.io/cloud provider. Feel free to open an issue if you run into a bug, if you have a feature request for the SIG, join our mailing list and join our Slack channel. And feel free to ping myself, Jago or Chris, or any of the chairs in the SIG. And we have bi-weekly meetings, which are Wednesdays at 1 p.m. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate it. We got two more updates here. The first one is SIG API machinery with David Eads.
Eads, and yes.
Sorry,
just
Eads.
Stopped sharing. So correction is habit, I'm afraid. Here we go. All right. So I'm David Eads, Devs2K on GitHub. You should be seeing some slides. I am one of the co-leads for SIG API machinery. And we have a short agenda. So what we did last time, you can kind of summarize what we did last time as pushing our existing features forward in their maturity cycle. So pieces of CRDs went from alpha to beta. They're listed here. A couple noteworthy ones: pruning. So when you upgrade to 1.15, you'll notice that if you have structural schemas, and there's a big long doc for this, as pieces get stored, you can have extraneous information pruned out. And there are docs explaining why you'd want to do that. It's very helpful and will be on by default when you move, maybe even required when you move to V1. I think I have a note on it later. The other one is defaulting to alpha. So you can have default on read, which is something new that you didn't have power to do before. Admission webhooks only allow you to default on write. and defaulting on read is really useful as you grow an API. And then open API publishing. So you're familiar with things like the kube control validation. It's driven by open API. There are other good reasons to publish it. It moved to beta, so you should be seeing that as well if you have schemas on your CRDs. We also moved admission webhooks forward. There was a hole around what happens if one admission webhook makes a change and another normal admission plugin needs to have another look, so validation will pass. We went through, and now you will have your webhook called potentially twice. You should read the docs on how to do this. Basically, you need to have an idempotent webhook. You kind of logically needed it before, but this will force the issue. And there's some improvements to how we can select objects and skip them. The new piece that we've been working on inside of a feature branch is related to priority and fairness. So if you have a lot of people contending on a loaded API server, whose requests get held and whose requests get processed. There are links to the KEP there and the feature branch that we're working on. It did not land or merge into the main branch last release, but we have been developing it. So looking forward to 1.16, we're going to continue pushing for mature extensibility options. I know it's been a long-term arc, and we've been coming to this meeting saying we're doing it every release. And I hope you can see that we have been doing these pieces as we go. It just takes time to get the right pieces, and more feedback comes in, and we find things that are behaviorally required before GA. So we have polls open for what it'll take to move custom resources to V1 and admission webhooks to V1. We will see whether we are able to land those. We are not going to promote them unless we believe they are ready. But we're hoping to get that done. Server side apply is moving forward as well. There are some KEPs related, or there's at least one, I think 2 KEPs related to changes that are required. And we are still working through the impacts of what those changes are going to mean. And we'll see where those lead. I think some of them may be more significant than others. And hopefully we will be able to move flow control towards alpha. Again, we're not going to move it early. It's being developed in a feature branch. You can have a look at the KEP if you don't know what it is, or the code if you're interested. Several people from the community have been working on that. Min Kim, Mike Spritzer, and I think Aaron Prindle are the main implementers. Good job, guys. It's hard working in a feature branch. Not everyone can see it. Glad you're doing it. There are some notes that we should make people aware of as we move CRDs and admission webhooks to GA. There are some noteworthy changes that are going to happen. I've called out a couple of the most important here. CRDs should not use a K8s.io group or a Kubernetes.io group without API approval. This is already an existing policy that I've linked to here. What we realized is that some accidents had happened where people had cargo culted groups. And so we have built an enforcement mechanism into, or are planning an enforcement mechanism into the actual CRD implementation. If you are using a K8s.io group, you should look through the KEP, figure out what's going to be required. It's fairly lightweight. It's an annotation that links to where your API was approved. And then there is a path forward if your API is not approved yet. And more details in the KEP. Pruning based on the structural schema will be on. I guess we force it on. I knew I had a note to self there. It's important for making sure you don't have time bomb squatted fields. And if you don't know what that is, you should probably just read the doc and see what it is. Admission webhooks, the defaulting changes are going through. There's several of them. I've called out the 2 that I think are most important here. Failure policy. If you don't specify it, you're going to go from ignore, which is fail open, to fail, which is fail closed. And timeouts. So if you have a slow one, the timeout is changing. I think it's shrinking from 30 seconds to 10-ish, much shorter. And so be aware, and on the previous page, there were links to the overall checklists for these items. Jordan is extremely thorough. And then the last spot where you can find us, if you have questions or you think some of this sounds cool and you want to work on it, we are on Slack. There's me and Daniel, and I should have filled in that README link, and our Slack channel and our mailing list. All right, that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate it. We're going to move on to the last update of the day. We got Aaron Krickenberger again.
Hi, everybody. Aaron of Sigbeard here again. Now I'm wearing my steering committee hat, and I'm going to give an update from the steering committee. So here we go. Move that thing over there. Okay, so first off, happy 7-Eleven Day. I can't believe nobody's made the joke yet. So thanks, everybody. So what even is the steering committee? For those of you who maybe aren't intimately familiar with our community governance, we're sort of broken up into a bunch of special interest groups. Those are these things here. Those special interest groups have potentially many sub-projects. Those are all the individual repos that you're aware of. So Andrew was talking about, all the different cloud providers are gradually going to become sub-projects, or many of the different cluster providers that SIG Cluster Lifecycle works on are sub-projects. These things then sort of for things that cross multiple domains, those escalate over to working groups, which are sort of time-bounded and cross-SIG. And then for things that can't be owned by sort of any of these and do need a final group of deciders, that is the steering committee here. And we also delegate some responsibilities out to other committees. Committees are things that have sort of more finely grained membership criteria and election processes. So you're probably familiar with the product security team and the code of conduct committee as well. These are all the members of the steering committee. I've given their GitHub handles so you can get stalk them all that way. I'm SpiffXP. It maps totally well to Aaron Krickenberger, don't worry. So what did we do last quarter? Well, I'd like to thank Brandon Phillips, member of the steering committee, for creating a funding and budgeting process. I'm actually not going to click through all these links, but these are all available on the slides for you to click through. So we now have a repo called Kubernetes/funding where you can file an issue if you have funding requests that need to go through the steering committee. And basically, we have requests for one-time costs under $200, over $200, or ongoing costs. And so the idea is by filing an issue, we sort of have this discussion out in the open. We use GitHub issue templates to sort of figure out what are the questions that need to be answered. Not listed on that governance doc, I guess, was the concept of user groups. So this is a place for people who are interested in talking about things related to common use cases of Kubernetes, but who don't actually own any code on the project, but would like to take advantage of some of our community infrastructure like Google Groups and SIGs and Slack and stuff. So a big thank you to a non-steering committee member. I'm apologizing ahead of time if I butcher these names, Damini Satya, for actually putting together the governance doc and the chartering and the process and stuff. And thanks to Eric Landerson for being sort of the first person to create a user group for big data. We also sort of identified any ownership gaps across the project. The main one being that we felt like the blog was not really wholly owned by the community. And so huge thanks to Caitlin Bernard for sort of helping make that a sub-project of SIG Docs, where I believe a number of community members who are interested in how we can sort of get the community to provide content and have it approved by the community, are there working on the blog. As Andrew mentioned, I'd like to give a huge thanks to Nishi and Andrew both for sort of putting together this plan to coalesce all the cloud provider SIGs into one SIG. He did mention 1.7. That's like 2 years ago, right? So it's great that we're finally sort of moving forward on that. We were looped in for approval purposes just because this was something that went across so many SIGs and kind of had to do with the governance of the project. But really our only role in this was, because it was such a well-formed proposal, to say, yeah, that looks good. We also gave up our GitHub admin privileges to two of the big repos in the project, the Kubernetes repo and the community repo. There are various members on the steering committee who have like approval rights or LGTM rights to different parts of those repos. But we felt like it just wasn't right for us to have sort of a blanket final button when we have delegated those responsibilities to other teams and other sub projects within the community. And so we're just like the rest of you when it comes to getting code pushed through these repos. And then finally, I wanted to call out 2 instances where we handled sort of decisions that couldn't be made by all of those other groups, and they did need to be escalated up to the steering committee. I swear I didn't plan this, but one of them was about Volcano. So originally, there was a plan to sort of rebrand the Kube batch sub-project of SIG scheduling into Volcano. And the chairs and leads of SIG scheduling sort of felt like that sort of took it beyond the scope of what SIG scheduling was willing to own, because Volcano does so much more than just basic scheduling. And so we kind of had a discussion about, well, sort of where does this fit within the project if this SIG doesn't want to own it and it starts to cross SIG boundaries? Is this sort of a working group thing? And where we settled on was basically, this is a great case of Volcano just being some project out there in the ecosystem that's not sort of officially run by the community. I believe it leverages parts of Kube Batch, which is sort of a community-owned thing. But this was just one of those examples where I really appreciated the SIG leadership kind of deciding they couldn't make the decision down there and they needed to sort of have a broader discussion, and I feel like it was relatively actionable. So thanks, Klaus, for sort of going along with all that, and thanks to everybody else who was involved. Also, thanks to Jonathan Birkin, who has taken over the leadership of the service catalog SIG and sort of just checked in and confirmed that, yeah, SIGs really ought to have more than just one chair. We don't want a single point of failure. And he did end up reaching out and finding somebody else to take over leadership of service catalog along with himself. Things that are in progress. So we are taking inclusivity and leadership training, sort of partially suggested by Tim Pepper. This thought that we have a lot of people who are really great at writing code, but maybe running an effective meeting and being very inclusive of the wide variety of diverse viewpoints that come at us from an open source community, we could maybe use some training on that. And so we feel like as the steering committee, we're going to model the behavior of doing that for ourselves. And if we find that that works out well for us, we may find that this is something we recommend to SIG contributor experience as the SIG that we sort of trust to help everybody work on best practices for running this community. We are also sort of approvers of the Code of Conduct Committee's docs. So they have 2 docs in flight. One is their charter. So thank you to Jennifer Rondeau, Carolyn, Eric Paris, and J.C. Mars for working on that. And we are also working on an election process for the Code of Conduct Committee. Also, huge thanks to Tasha, Drew, Gabby Moreno, Valerie, Brendan Burns, and I think I left out a couple other people for suggesting a new SIG. It started out as SIG UX. We're now going to call it SIG Usability. The charter for that is in flight and kind of at the lazy consensus period in Kubernetes community. And we sort of continue to chew through the issue of Slack user moderation. Our Slack instance is one of the largest Slack instances in the world, paid or free, and that is a lot for people to deal with. And so we're looking for sort of the right group of people to own moderation in all of its aspects there. We do have some wonderful tooling that has been built by community members, but in terms of finding sort of the final decider, we're still kind of working through that. There are some issues that we've worked on where we could really use some help. One is formalizing the concept of sub-project owners. So I talked about how SIGs delegate their things out to sub-projects, but we still need sort of a machine consumable way of doing that. And this gets especially tricky because owners files are scattered around literally everywhere. We have somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 owners files scattered across the project. That links to an issue that describes a number of things we could do to improve that situation, notably leveraging GitHub teams. Also, there was a thread that came out about sort of what could we as a community do to help out with sort of diversity scholarship and travel support for KubeCons. And so Paris Pittman has sort of put forth a proposal but doesn't have the time to really carry this forward, and if any other community member really cares deeply about this diversity scholarship stuff, please take a look at that and sort of help put it in front of the steering committee. Things that are coming up in Q3. So first off, the Contributor Summit for at KubeCon North America 2019 is basically something we have delegated to the team of people linked there. Most events are planned by most community events are planned by contributor experience via the events team subproject. And so we kind of trust their decision making. But just to sort of be clear and explicit about it, while we will advise as needed, we sort of agree with that team's perspective that it is important to maintain the Contributor Summit as a sponsorship-free event. Also, the steering committee election is coming up. If any of the stuff I've described sounds fun or interesting to you, or you'd like to influence the project in this way, good news. 6 people who were bootstrap members drop off, and the first 2-year term is over for 3 other people. This means that 4 seats are up for election, making for a total of 7 steering committee members after this election, as opposed to the 12 that we have now. Shockingly, we are behind schedule. We really need to choose election officers and start getting ready to get the schedule out there and the dates, so look for more information from us soon. And if you'd like to know more about what we're doing, we use milestones in the Kubernetes steering repo, and we're currently working on things that are in the July 2019 milestone. How can you contribute? So if you see something, say something, file an issue in the Kubernetes steering repo if you need something to sort of be chewed through and worked on, and we'll make sure that goes into the appropriate milestone and we work on it that way. Any of the issues I described earlier where we need some help, I would love it if you came and help us. Generally, the way to interact with the steering committee that works best is to come with fully formed proposals or initial ideas in the form of PRs. We are generally very busy people who don't necessarily have the time to take an idea and then chew on it and then come up with the solution. Solutions by committee always turn into bike shed sessions, and that's not really a super productive way of moving forward. And then just a personal plea myself is like, anytime somebody takes notes at one of our meetings, please, it's so amazingly helpful. It's incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for like making sure we have a written record of what we said, because discussions can move pretty fast. Where to find us? So the Kubernetes steering repo. We also have a publicly accessible Google group, which is also a mailing list that you can get to via steering@kubernetes.io. If you have something sensitive you want to talk about, steering private. If we feel that it doesn't need to be private, we'll probably take it back to the public list. And then in terms of meetings, we have an open public meeting the first Wednesday of the month, and then we sort of have a closed but recorded meeting the third Wednesday of the month. I will stop sharing my screen. Any questions?
Are there any questions for Aaron? All right, no questions. Thank you so much, Aaron. Great steering update. Really appreciate it. I see that you also added 2 announcements to the docs here. We actually do have a little time, so please go ahead, talk about those announcements.
I'm not gonna. I have closed my browser window in my haste to exit that presentation, so I don't have the notes in front of me, so I won't click on things. But as part of that test grid annotation thing, I forgot to tell you all that we went ahead and already changed as many job configs as we possibly could to use annotations. So some of you may be interested in converting things to annotations, but we have tried to go ahead and preemptively do this for as many of you as we possibly can. Yeah, and it is linked in the doc, so you can check out the PR that did that. As a result of this, though, like one tiny limit of the annotation-based thing is we can't have the same test results show up as different tab names under different dashboards. So if you are somebody who has the same test results showing up in like 3 different dashboards and you want it to be named 3 different things in each of those dashboards, you're going to have to use the old way of doing things. So some of you may have found that test tabs you used to expect to be named one thing or named another. If so, we're really sorry about that, and come poke us at SIG testing and we can help you work through corrections there. I know I bumped into one specific case with some vSphere cloud provider stuff, and I talked to the person there, but this is just a shout in case anybody else wants to do that. And the reason we are more comfortable allowing people to sort of do their own test grid things as opposed to having humans review every test grid change is that we do have a set of common conventions that are enforced for test grid. And those are enforced by the test that is linked also in chat. The test itself isn't super readable, but it just sort of makes sure that, like, if you are adding jobs, that they show up on test grid dashboards. And if you add a test grid dashboard that sort of matches the prefix of like a SIG or a working group dashboard that's already there, that it should like automatically be grouped there. So things like that. So it's more that we trust the tests to prevent you from checking in bad test grid changes, as opposed to expecting you to wait for busy humans to review your test grid changes. That's all I have on that.
Awesome, thank you. We do have one shout out this week. So from Ben the Elder, shout out again to Antonio Ojea. Thanks to his work, we finally have CI passing all conformance tests with an IPv6 kind cluster. You can find other earlier shout outs in the shout outs channel if you want to have a look at those. I want to thank all the presenters today for the updates and demos. So thank you so much, Klaus. Thank you, Andrew, David, and Aaron. Tune in next week when Jeff here will host, and we have SIG Azure, we have the Code of Conduct Committee, and we have SIG Release giving some updates. And with that, we hope you all have a pleasant rest of your week and have an awesome day. Bye, everyone.